Welcome to the Parent Advocate Podcast, a show where we celebrate, defend, support, and uplift the voices of the LGBTQIA community. I'm your host, Stephen Chakumba. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Lisette Trujillo.
Hi, everyone. Lisette here, she, her, ella. The mission of the Parent Advocate Podcast is to elevate conversations and reframe narratives around trans and non-binary youth to help change hearts and minds. Each week, we bring you our take on all things happening from the perspective of two parents of BIPOC transgender kids.
Lisette, today's episode is going to be extra special because we get to talk to a dad that I've gotten to know really well over the past few years.
That's right, Stephen. Today we have Ed Diaz, one of the fathers from the upcoming feature-length documentary, The Dads.
Well, I don't even want to keep him waiting. I cannot wait to get to this conversation. So welcome everyone once again to the Parent Advocate Podcast. Let's get started. All right, Lisette, it has been quite the week. Obviously, it was Trans Awareness Week and TDOR. What have you been up to?
It's full Christmas in Valencia because they don't celebrate Thanksgiving. And so it's been like magic. There's trees everywhere, the city lit up. It's Christmas time, which is kind of fun. We went to a Friendsgiving on Saturday, which was really nice. It kind of made us feel like we weren't isolated and alone. And yeah, just was at different Trans Day of Remembrance virtual events. And then we went to a local event here and have just been busy working and advocating. But other than that, it's been pretty calm and nice for a change. What have you been up to?
So it's also been particularly calm here as well. I spent a lot of time working on the Impact campaign. We're actually trying to select an Impact producer for the Impact campaign for the film. We've been doing a lot of submissions for film festivals. I think we're at like 12 to 15 film submissions to date, which is really great. We just completed the paperwork for the Envision Impact Lab grant, which means we can start in earnest with our impact campaign activities. And so it's been a very busy week for a lot of the behind the scenes work that goes into getting this film out to the masses. You know what? We can talk about all the stuff that we really didn't talk about this time, but let's get to today's topics instead. Lisette, can we really talk about the normalization of violence towards women and girls on the right? Like last week, there was this massive dump of emails which showed that there is a ring of depravity at the uppermost echelons of power, including the president and many of his allies. And instead of a round condemnation of pedophilia, of child trafficking, of sexual assault towards women, of dehumanization of women and girls, members on the right are going out of their way to defend and rationalize this absolutely abhorrent behavior.
Stephen, to the point where now Fox News is putting up like demographic polls, and the demographic polls will say women 15 to 44, as if to say that the age of maturation and or consent should be 15. It's ridiculous. It's awful. And it's further proof that it's not about morals or values, but about power and using religious institutions to keep their voters in line.
Lisette, it goes even deeper than that. There is currently an effort to move the Department of Education to the Department of Labor, apparently. And beyond that effort to move education to the Department of Labor, there is an effort to lower the age of consent to 14.
Stephen.
And to lower child labor laws to allow children as young as 12 to work. And so if you look at what's happening on the right, the normalization of violence, the dehumanization of women and girls, this effort to dumb down our population, reducing the age of consent and reducing the age that allows younger people to work, what are we doing? We are normalizing the treatment of children as adults, which makes them more likely to be targeted by predators in this society. It's disturbing. Once again, people don't know what's happening because they're so distracted by all the noise that's going on, but it's like people need to be paying attention. They need to be paying attention. Back when they thought it was the Democrats running Pizzagate, eating children in the basement of a pizza parlor in DC, they were all up in arms. QAnon was all over it. Now that it's actually their leaders, the people that they elected who ran all these campaigns to drain the swamp and to get to the bottom of the Epstein files, once they're finding out it's all of them, now suddenly the tune has changed. Now it's, oh, is she really a child if she's 15? Yes, motherfucker, she is.
What was really interesting, Jose was telling me the other day that he saw something on TikTok or Instagram that was like the lengths that they went to make Pizzagate real, when in reality, if you look through the emails that were dumped, it's explicit and clear. And they're trying to act like, no, it can't really say that. But like they were willing to talk about like weird symbolism and conspiracy theory. It makes no sense.
Lisa, what's worse than that, honestly, is that they will go out of their way to defend the indefensible. And yet they will make shit up about trans people. They will tell you to be deathly afraid of trans people, that trans people are the reason that all this bad stuff is happening, that trans people are mass murderers, that trans people are mass shooters, that trans people are assaulting women and girls in bathrooms, when in fact, the actual people that are doing all of this harm right in front of you, you do nothing about. You will create an illusory harm to make everybody afraid and do nothing about the actual harm that is being caused today by people you can go and stop.
1,000%. 1,000%. I don't even have a follow-up to that one because you are 100% correct. And so I'm going to move us on to our next topic. I don't even know if we've ever talked about this country, but in light of the fact that families of trans youth are looking to flee the United States for safer shores abroad, I think this topic bears discussion. Recently, the government of New Zealand banned puberty blockers for trans youth in their country.
I can't process. When I read this the other day, like alarm bells went off because I know at least one family in our network, in our community, that was looking at New Zealand as an option for their child. The research, they felt very strongly about the fact that New Zealand didn't have any of this anti-trans bullshit that we're seeing in the United States and in some other countries, especially in the UK. And they were really gassed about it. And to see suddenly that another country is aligning themselves with this CAS report and the erroneous findings of the CAS report as a basis for banning puberty blockers, it's just alarming.
I think what we need to keep an eye on is the fact that this goes against the New Zealand Constitution. And so it will be challenged in court. And people who've already moved there are, letting folks know that this isn't the end, right? And so hopefully in time, but you know how the courts are, we may see a reversal in this policy. But again, families need to be aware of what's moving and what's in place in order to ensure that they're moving to a place that's safe for their children. It's so disappointing, especially because the CAS report is not based in fact at all.
And not only is it not based in fact, but there have been subsequent reviews of the CAS report that have systematically destroyed it, from the methodology that they employed to the findings to the misinterpretation and mischaracterization of what the underlying studies that they use actually say. It's embarrassing that yet another country is using this flawed research as a basis for denying people rights, access to care.
And again, it's a reminder that this is global, right? I think people often think that it's just the United States that is targeting trans people in this significant way, but we're seeing this as a global effort by the same lobbies. And so that should set off alarm bells for all of us.
Absolutely. So I think I was pleased this week when I read about the 213 Democrats that signed a letter to the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, demanding that he condemn the use of divisive, demonizing, and dehumanizing language directed at the transgender community that has been happening on the House floor. Like, he has been completely inept at managing the decorum of the floor and of people who come to the floor. And instead of making sure that people are not out here disparaging trans and non-binary people, he's doing nothing.
Honestly, Stephen, this was a surprise for me, considering the direction in which House Democrats and Democratic senators were going earlier in the year, which was to sort of back away from their support of trans people. And so this made me feel hopeful. And maybe it's because of the large blue wave we saw happen a few weeks ago with Mamdani winning and seeing, Democrats really take hold in their elections. So maybe this is a good sign that they're realizing that moving to a more moderate place is not the way to go.
Maybe. And I'm going to have to say this part because I was definitely giving her some shit earlier in the year. But the first signature on that letter is Sarah McBride's. And for all of the anger and upsetment that I know I had and I felt around her seeming decision to just go along to get along instead of fighting back vociferously at all the attacks on her and other trans and non-binary people, this approach, this timing, I think really shows that she maybe really knows what she's doing. It doesn't mean that Johnson's going to do anything, but to your point about the blue wave and timing may be the basis for which this makes this an appropriate time to do it. I have to give her flowers.
Yeah, I'm glad she felt like she could advocate for herself, and I'm glad that she had the support of the other 212 Democratic members to sign on alongside her. I think it's really important.
But Lisette, enough with these topics. Let's get to our guest.
I'm so excited. I can't wait.
Ed Diaz is a San Antonio proud father of a 14-year-old transgender daughter named Charlie. As Texas enacted increasingly hostile laws targeting trans youth, Ed became an advocate, speaking out while also navigating the practical realities of ensuring his child's access to care. Owner of a construction business in Texas for years, Ed recently made the difficult decision to relocate his family to Canada, where Charlie could be safe and receive the medical care she needs. In addition to being a full-time dad, running his business, and advocating on behalf of other LGBTQ+ youth, Ed is a two-time attendee of the Dad's Retreat and credits the community of fathers he's found with helping him find solidarity, healing, and hope. Ed's story is featured in the upcoming documentary, The Dads, which follows his family's journey towards safety, belonging, and a future where Charlie can live freely. Everyone, please welcome Ed Diaz to our show.
Welcome to the show, Ed. We're so happy you could join us today.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, there's so much that we want to talk to you about, but let's start with your early journey. When did you first realize Charlie was expressing her identity in a way that felt authentic to who she really is? And how did you approach those early years as a parent?
Charlie, I mean, as soon as she was able to express herself in language, but I would say probably around age 3 was when we noticed that she had a preference for like feminine things like Frozen, the movie, and all the dolls and everything. And we supported that. I mean, it was just kind of, it started, I mean, really early, actually. And so, I mean, I didn't really have any issues with letting her play with the toys that she wanted to play with. I mean, I have always enjoyed playing soccer, and I remember trying to push her into doing those kinds of things like in pre-K, and she didn't really like it. But I didn't force her to do it. She was doing ballet when she was really young as well, but even though she had a preference for, like, I guess for lack of a better term, like girls things, we had her in a ballet class as a boy, and she didn't stick it out. And it was only in retrospect that I realized, I mean, she really just wanted to be, she enjoyed the dancing, but she wanted to be dancing as herself, which would be as one of the other girls. But later on, after she had sort of socially transitioned at school, like she was doing dance for a while, and that was great. I mean, because she was doing it as herself. I mean, I would say probably around kindergarten was a strange year. I mean, I remember actually in pre-K1, so she would have been 4, and one of her earliest close friends, who she's still close friends with, when I was picking her up and they had been playing outside, like, in the school area, like playground, and her friend had used the she, her pronouns with her. And it kind of took me aback a little bit, but I didn't really, it was just, obviously Charlie had confidence enough to confide in her friend, and her friend just, I mean, I think kids, they recognize those things about each other pretty quickly. So anyway, I just kind of stored that. I was like, that's interesting. And it made me think more. And I mean, I definitely resisted somewhat. I mean, I kind of was, I think I had a lot of fear, like most parents do initially, that, when I realized, like that she really might be a trans girl, I had a ton of fear because like the Texas legislature hadn't really ramped up yet. I think the first bathroom bill here was like in 2015, but it didn't pass. It wasn't until maybe about 4.5 years ago that I still like that, like, because we had basically, kind of figured a lot of things out and things were going smoothly for us as a family. school was going well and everything was fine. And then, all of a sudden in 2017 was when I first became aware of like just how much legislation there was, and saw a Facebook post that a friend had done. It was like a reel of someone who became my friend, because I messaged her immediately because I was watching her testify, a recorded testimony that she made in front of the Texas legislature, like about the sports bill, which eventually passed that same year. But I kind of jumped right in to advocacy then as much as I could, which is where I met, some of the dads initially, is at the Texas Capitol.
If
But yeah,
Daniel was sitting with us right now, he would say that his friend also outed him at school by using his correct pronouns too, and being
mm,
like, "Hey, can he and I go play out in the soccer field?" And Daniel was like, "What is my mom gonna say?" So it's so interesting to see that our kids are having those conversations around gender with their peers at a young
mm.
age, right? Like they're expressing who they are and feel safe to do so, while also not sharing with the adults around them, or their parents.
So Ed, you had jumped around in your response to like those early years, but I want to bring you back to those early years because when we first met, and actually even before we first met, you had submitted a response to the Google form that I sent out to all the dads about who they were. We wanted to kind of get a sense for the dads before we actually made it to the retreat. And one of the things that you shared in that response was that you changed Charlie's school, I think maybe in the first grade. I wanted to know, what did switching schools mean for Charlie and for you as a dad who wanted her to have room to thrive? What did that mean for you to change schools for Charlie?
I mean, it was everything really, because Charlie had been to many different schools, kind of like in pre-K before kindergarten, and like so when kindergarten, we switched her to like it was like a charter school called Great Hearts, which is kind of like, I mean, in my mind, it's kind of like a closeted Christian national school. But I mean, we weren't really aware of it at the time. It just seemed like a highly structured kind of liberal arts, traditional educational school that a lot of our friends, older kids, my stepson, was attending there, and they had all sort of made a transition to the school thinking like, oh, it's going to be really great. And it wasn't great for us because Charlie was not able to express herself there. She made friends, but it was uniforms. She did not like it. It was during that year that I think we really kind of figured out that she needed to be in a different kind of place. And so her mom and I, we had been split for a few years. We both agreed on a school that was actually really close to where I live. And, I had put her in a summer program, like just kind of a summer camp program that school had. And that's when Charlie first started kind of wearing, she wore a dress to they were doing a play, like it was like a 2-week play that they were putting on during the summer camp. And so Charlie, wanted to wear a dress to the school, and she was very well, the teachers were very, they just got it immediately. And yeah, I mean, we had a few hiccups. I mean, I think her mom's side of the family were a little slower to kind of, accept everything, but they came along pretty quickly. I mean, I think the fact that probably I would say like well into first grade, I mean, we had sort of arrived at a groove. Her friends were giving her nicknames, but she was also choosing sort of, alternate names for herself. So like her given name wasn't even really being used at that time. And then Charlie came, I think officially, like the official name change came around like third grade, probably.
Well, you mentioning Charlie's choosing her name, what did that feel like to see her community honor that so naturally? And what did that mean for you?
I thought it was really important. We had several nicknames, but I think it was, I think she was with my wife and they were out with one of her friends and they were having a conversation. And I think Charlie had been thinking about it, but it was, they sort of agreed upon that like it was time for her to kind of like make it official. So I wrote the school because I think it was during the summer. It was like during the COVID years. So I wrote the school and said, this is the new name and these are the pronouns. And they kind of had already been using those pronouns anyway, but I mean they didn't miss a beat. Like it was very sort of immediate. So it made me feel really great because I knew that she was going to be, I don't know, she just was growing quickly and like academically things were getting a lot better for her. I mean, there was a struggle, I think, in the first few years while we were kind of sorting those things out. And a lot of things fell into place when those things were sort of firmly established for her.
So it's interesting to hear you talk about the ways that you affirm Charlie in your home. I'm curious to know, like, what were those early conversations like as you supported Charlie through those transition steps? Like I'm hearing about nicknames and dresses. Like I'm really curious because I'm a single dad. I was the only person in the house doing all this stuff. So I'm curious to know like what conversations dads are having around their children transitioning in the home and outside the home.
I mean, I think it was probably it would have been in first grade, like that we had started a relationship with our child psychologist here in San Antonio. And after several meetings with her, I didn't really realize until, it became more important with the legislation and, this kind of talk about gender dysphoria. But her diagnosis was really early for that. Her doctor just said Charlie knows that she's loved and supported. And, it was like letting her grow her hair out and choosing her clothing, and the names obviously were important, the pronouns. But my wife had bought her a few things and she had a couple of different outfits. And initially it was more, like just at home kind of for playing and things like that. But I do remember one time where I was like, let's just kind of like tear this open. We went shopping and I bought her a bunch of different outfits and she was really happy. And, we got rid of a bunch of the clothes that she never wore. And, it's kind of like those sorts of things that matter a lot. I mean, even in those early days, I think I don't know if it wasn't that she didn't trust me, but I mean, I think she would confide more in my wife for whatever reason, or maybe she felt like she was letting me down somehow. But I mean, she knew that I was supporting her, I think. But those kinds of closer conversations about things, I think, initially happened with my wife. But, obviously I kind of figured at a certain point, this is the way it is. And like, all I have to do is just keep loving her the best I can and protecting her. And yeah, that was pretty much it.
Thank you for sharing that. I think for those of us that had our younger children socially transition, there's all these milestones that we all kind of share and have in common. And one day we'll all have to like compile it somehow, all these milestones around changing bedroom decor and closets. And it's really beautiful. So Ed, you talked earlier that you saw the rise in anti-trans legislation in your state, right? Texas being the main place where a majority of bills were filed. I'm from Arizona. I don't know if Stephen told you. So we were like a test state, and then Texas followed, and then Florida outdid us all, right? So our first bathroom ban was in 2013 when that bill was filed and then it didn't pass. What was it like to really start to see a concerted effort with talking points that really demonized our children and our families? What did that feel like for you? What did that feel like for Charlie? And can you explain to our listeners what it's like to live in a state that feels hostile to your well-being and safety?
Well, it was very strange because I think our experience personally was incredibly positive. Like Charlie has had, to my knowledge, like no experiences with bullying or people even saying anything in a negative way to her directly, but she's highly aware of all of the things that were going on. But I mean, I think for myself, I became jaded. Initially, I had so much hope because I just felt like, I had to go through my own sort of period of adjustment. And, I felt as though like, this is just, it seemed very politically motivated from the very beginning. And there was like a Twitter, and it's not called that anymore, but there was a Twitter page. This woman had talked about how, the Republicans in 2015 had decided that this was going to become their next major wedge issue. And they were putting a lot of money into it. And there were these shadowy groups that were doing all this. So, I was aware of that from the very beginning, but going to public testimony for like the sports bill. One thing that was clear after that first legislative session was that like they were going to have their pound of flesh no matter what. And so that year it was the sports ban. There was a lot of public testimony, and overwhelmingly at the Texas Capitol, most of the people that came out were opposed to this. They were in support of us and our kids. And there was a small minority, that really had sort of mischaracterized everything. But, we have this kind of Republican supermajority, and they had already made up their mind. Their minds were closed. They had already made their decision. And it didn't matter that the testimony went well into, past midnight. Didn't matter. And so we kind of kept our hopes up, and then there was the really devastating one that happened 2 years later. And that one was really, really tough.
I really think it's important what you mentioned around Charlie not experiencing discrimination in her day-to-day life. because that's like the one thing that when Daniel would go and testify against anti-trans legislation or he spoke to journalists, he said, in my day-to-day life at school, at home, with my neighbors in community spaces, I do not experience the discrimination that I experience from legislators who are trying to pass anti-trans legislation at the state level. And I think that that really highlights that this was a politically motivated and driven campaign to win elections and to kind of divert attention from things that people really need, like healthcare or, I don't know. It was to win elections, and Politico wrote about it in 2018, right? And so did Charlie ever go and testify at the state capitol, or was this something that you and your wife did together? I know you talk about having hope, but do you see a way forward from this moment in which our children can return home?
I personally don't see a lot of hope here in Texas for things to change anytime soon, which is why we made our decision to leave. And it's sad because I know, many other families here that, I mean, I'm not sure that they have the means to move out of state or what, but I think it's one of the things that as a parent that was very frustrating to me, especially like that session 4.5 years ago, was that there was such little media attention, and any media like articles that I came across were always quite negative. And, it got better 2 years ago, with the medical ban. I started to see more positive press stories. But, even for somebody who has a trans kid, I mean, I think that was like they were trying to do so much like without the greater public being even aware of what they were doing. But I think it's kind of one of those things where it's like we're a perfect target because there's a lot of us, but we're still a pretty small group. And so I think it's one of those things where the average person, if they don't know a trans person or they don't know a family with a trans kid or something like that, maybe they somehow rationalize that it's maybe not such a big deal, or like all the billions of dollars that they spent in the broadcasting this message that like trans people are bad, that, somehow it filters in that they just think like, oh, well, maybe it's fine that all this is happening. I mean, I think that it's frightening when you hear all the stories of violence towards trans people. And, as a parent, I mean, that's something that I would, always worry about, not so much with Charlie, but just, generally speaking, like when we were out and about and having some kind of confrontation or something, like those things never happened. Like it just kept getting worse. And I'm obviously not comfortable with, my child not having like her full set of rights to be able to be, treated as a full person in this country. That started getting stripped away like 4.5 years ago, and it just kept getting worse.
I also want to highlight too, I'm going to assume you're Latino because of your last name.
Yes.
And so I think it's really, really important for our listeners to understand that the policies that were being pushed these last 6-7 years against anti-trans youth are actually the same policies that existed and were in place that harmed Latinos, Latina people, Latinx people in the state of Texas, Arizona, and California, right? Like there were milestone cases that were filed in the state of Texas regarding access to sports, right? One of the big cases was filed against a Texas high school that would only allow one Mexican girl to be on the cheerleading team a year, right? And so they had to file a lawsuit to say, like, actually, you cannot quantify racially how many people can be on a team. Or when we talk about bathroom access, right? And we talk about the segregation that Black and brown people experience in the South and Southwest, that type of oppression is in line and aligned with what we've seen happening to trans youth. And so I'm curious to know what that feels like as somebody who comes from from a community of people who are already experiencing discrimination, who've experienced it, and we're seeing kind of all of that collide today. And Texas, Arizona, Florida being kind of like these flashpoints for that kind of discrimination to repeat itself.
That's a really good question. My father was like a civil rights investigator in the 60s. So like I was aware of, like, I remember, growing up in the 70s and high school in the 80s. And, it's like, I remember things getting quite a bit better. I mean, I would, as a kid, hear racial slurs. So like, it always made me uncomfortable, but it seemed by the time that I was in high school, it seemed like things were improving. And I had friends, from high school who came out after high school. So I had like friends who were gay that had come out, and like it just seemed like so much was improving generally, like culturally, like in the US. I mean, to me at least, that personally was my experience. I'm aware of all of this discrimination that exists in the history of Texas, but I hadn't really thought about it in that way specifically. But it's the same to me in the larger sense. It's the same type of white supremacist ideology, which is linked to essentially like them maintaining power over anyone else that they think they have dominion over, right? Which is, it has ties to the Confederacy, really. I mean, it's the same principle. I like Heather Cox Richardson. She's someone who kind of like lit that up for me. I think the first time I read it, I don't think she like invented that at all, but kind of points it out a lot in her writing, that in this particular moment, these things all seem to be tied together, because there's this ideology that that certain groups are superior to others, racially, economically, and like they deserve that, like, that if you're in this like undeserving class, and then you deserve to be there, and that, you don't have like that, your kids don't have choice over their bodies, and, in the exact same way that a woman doesn't have a right to choose or have control over her own body. I mean, it's the same kind of thing where, they're stripping these constitutional rights from us or kids, and they think it's justified because it's a very old ideology that doesn't seem to want to die. That's my opinion anyway.
I think we share that opinion here as, people of color living in the United States who have seen this shift. It's interesting. My father was a professor of history, and one of the things he would always talk to me about was like the civil rights era and all the rights that people of color won as a result of the efforts of all of our civil rights activists, from Bayard Rustin to MLK, Rosa Parks, Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson. Like, there are people who stood up for other people so that we could enjoy the rights that were hard fought. I have had the privilege of watching a bunch of rough cuts and watching you talk about the decision that you made to leave the country for your child's kind of emotional well-being and safety. How did it feel to finally leave with Charlie and set up a home essentially in another country? How does that feel, and how did you get to that decision?
Well, we had been, as a family, we've been discussing moving to a blue state since the legislation passed in I guess 2023, right? Banning the healthcare for minors here in Texas. So we were undecided about where to go. We were weighing a few different options, but we were thinking somewhere else in the US. And it was basically the day after Election Day when, just seeing the way that the court had gone with Dobbs, and I just, seeing what had happened here in Texas, how it didn't matter how much overwhelming, resistance there was. Like, I think, for example, when they announced the bill, I think it was called SB 14, but there might have been a House version at the time. But whichever one came first, when all the advocacy groups were saying like, okay, it's all hands on deck, everyone come to the Capitol today for this action. There were like 3,000 people that showed up in opposition to it, and less than 100 people in support of it, right? A 30-to-1 ratio. But they had already changed the dynamic of public testimony and essentially created this like, manufacturing consent style. It was basically a farce, because they gave their witnesses equal time. They called it preferred testimony, and Frank and Rachel were there, and a lot of really amazing people for our side, but their side was filled with like people with an opinion, like not experts, paid to give testimony, and giving it the appearance of something legitimate. I mean, but never once, even during the arguments for when the bill finally came to the floor to be discussed, they didn't even talk about the merits of what they were building this whole thing on. Like, it just never even got discussed. Like the fact that I remember there was a Wired article that came out when all the parents were there and were in these rooms in the capitals and going to try to speak to legislators and doing as much as we could, just be showing up basically. And I remember there was an article that had come out talking about the American College of Pediatrics, how like a lot of the bill was referencing this group that the Southern Poverty Law Center had declared a hate group, because it was basically a fake organization, not full of any medical professionals. It was just basically Christian nationalists with an opinion about, transgender people. But that's what they were using as their science, right? I mean, it was incredibly frustrating and saddening. And yeah, I mean, I just think the way that I just felt like they were going to target it nationally, there wasn't really, I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like Charlie was still safe here in the US. And like we had this opportunity because my wife is Canadian and we've talked about eventually moving, but this really lit the fire for us to kind of to do it. And it was hard, but like we managed to get it done. I mean, I'm still not in Canada yet. I mean, I'm still in Texas. So I'm trying to get up there as quickly as I can. But Charlie has become a permanent resident of Canada. She does not have to leave Canada. And hopefully within 3 years, she'll become a Canadian citizen. I wish every trans kid, in the US had that opportunity as well, because it's deeply saddening to me to think that, how people are going to struggle to get healthcare in places. And I don't know that the average public really understands like how stressful all of this is, and how much more we have to deal with as parents of trans kids to try to like find healthcare and like travel and just the amount of pressure that you feel, not only for your kids' safety, but just, to make sure that they get to continue what they started. We started this in Texas and we had a great doctor and it was convenient, affordable, close by. And all that was just completely taken away from us, and we had to try to find it again. And now, if this administration gets their way, like no kid will be able to get it in the United States. And that's deeply saddening to me.
So Stephen mentioned to me about your ex-wife being completely supportive and in lockstep with supporting Charlie and the need for Charlie to move. So what was that conversation like when you first discussed your wife adopting Charlie so that Charlie could have access to residency and citizenship? What was that like for you all as a family to really start having those discussions that change, the dynamics and parental rights and status, right, for people in your family unit?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, it was probably by about second grade that we basically, had come together to really understand who Charlie was. And so, many years have gone by. And then, after the election, I called her, I mean, like within minutes after waking up, actually, and had this conversation with her. And she was completely on board. Like that's what's so incredible to me. Like Charlie is really loved by so many people. And I think she, being very aware of all the things that had happened here in Texas, that this was the best course for her future, given how bleak things were for us here. I mean, because we were transitioning also from like this really beautiful, safe school to, high school. And, we hadn't really figured out a school thing. I mean, there were so many reasons to kind of just go for it. And we hadn't completely figured it out, but thankfully, like, especially Charlie has really landed on her feet and she's very happy and she's in high school and, she misses her friends a lot. Her mom goes up and stays with us, as much as she can. But I think she's hoping maybe to possibly move there someday. But I mean, in the best interests of Charlie and her future, I think that unselfishly everyone agreed that this was the best course of action for her to get, there as quickly and as safely as she could.
So I think we haven't really talked about the fact that you're in the dads and that our relationship came through this organization because you and I met at the retreat in Joe Mary Lake, Maine for the first time. Like I didn't know you from a hole in the wall and I can't see my life without you now. Now that I've met
nice.
you. But can you talk to me about what it was like to come to that first retreat and be in community with all those other fathers?
Oh man, that was it was huge. It was really huge. I had initially gotten invited by Frank Gonzalez to come on that trip, and Wayne Maines, obviously, who I'd met both those guys at the Texas Capitol and hung out with them quite a bit because Wayne was in Austin at the time, and Frank was coming down from Dallas with his wife Rachel and sometimes their daughter and or daughters or their whole family. I mean, they were there way more than me, but I was I'd see them every single time I was there. But anyway, by the time the retreat rolled around and we got to Maine, it was almost instantaneous, like this huge release. I'd been holding so much in, and just like, I don't know if PTSD is like a little bit too strong, but I mean, I don't know. I haven't had a diagnosis of that, but it really felt like we could sort of, let things go. And it it was amazing to have like these really earnest and sincere conversations with other dads and meet this new crew of guys that, that I wasn't familiar with from the film. It was a very expansive experience, and I felt supported in a way that we had a network of support here in Texas before, but I think, given that, I mean, maybe it was just me, it felt sort of defeated by everything that had happened. And it was, I don't know, it felt like very hopeful, the dads, to me, because at the very minimum, it was this incredible source of support for each other that we had. And I mean, it's like I mentioned, it was incredible how like instantaneous it was. I mean, it felt like minutes or hours. Certainly we were like all fast friends. And yeah, it was an incredible experience, the first one, and as was the second one, but the first one was quite magical, for sure.
I just want to validate your feelings because I know you mentioned that PTSD felt like too strong of a word, but parents do experience secondary trauma from the legislative process and experience that we've had to deal with over the last 10 years, right? And so I think it's really, really important for people to understand. I really got emotional right now thinking about your ex-wife, Charlie's mom, having to give up legal guardianship of her daughter in order for her to find safety somewhere else. I don't think people recognize the sacrifices that are made for our children because of the political violence our families are experiencing. And so I'm so grateful you found a place to find healing and connection. I think it's really important for people. And I also think that we shouldn't minimize what this experience has felt like politically for so many of us. And so it's just really powerful to hear you share your story and to hear you share how loved Charlie is, because that's a testament to what family is. And family looks and is so many different ways, and it's comprised of so many different people, right? And so I think this generation of trans youth are going to tell a very different story as adults than the generations before them. And so thank you for sharing that with us. So my dad called me today, and it's been really hard for all of us. We're like a close family. I've always lived within blocks of my parents, and now we're on the other side of the world. But I was telling my dad that like Daniel's like taking the metro to go to school every day by himself, and he goes and does like jam sessions with his friends. He's made some friends out here. My dad called me this morning and he's like, I've been thinking about how he's like, I know that we're all sad that you've left, but Daniel gets to be free. Like Daniel's experienced freedom in a way he hasn't had to or hasn't been able to most of his life, because it's been around advocacy and fear and worry about what rights are going to get taken away from him year after year. And like, he doesn't have to worry about that. And like, you are free. So my final question to you is, what is your hope for Charlie in her new life? What do you hope for her in the next year or 5 years? And what's your hope for trans youth in the US?
Well, I think as far as Charlie is concerned, I've kind of always like listened to her. I recall doing an amazing, it was like an all day kind of what did they call it? Like the family tour with a group called Tent here in Texas. And it was just kind of educating parents, media training, but also just kind of a course that was like, taught, by trans members of like the Tent organization. And one of the things that stood out to me then, because just to kind of backpedal slightly to a question that I don't think got answered about Charlie's testifying and advocacy, that legislative session about 4.5 years ago, like she came up to the Capitol with me quite a bit. She didn't testify, but she was there. And then 2 years ago, after doing that Tent training, I checked in with her to see if she wanted to come to the Capitol, and she didn't want to. Like she saw like some, the counter protesters and stuff, and it got much worse, 2.5 years ago. The 4 years ago wasn't so bad, but 2 years ago was horrible. And so she wasn't there, and I don't blame her, because I mean, I think she just kind of wants to be herself and fit in. She's not ashamed in any way of who she is. And obviously she's participated in the film. And so she's, she has some exposure, but I think I just want her to have like a normal life. I think that's all any of our kids really want. They don't want to be known as like a trans kid. They just want to be like themselves and to just like have friends and just just live normal lives. I mean, that's all I think any of us want for our kids, right? It's not like we wanted any of this advocacy and spotlight or, having to put in so much extra time and energy and effort into this cause, but it's worth it because our kids are amazing. And I'm so happy to be a parent. I'm so happy to be Charlie's parent because I've learned so much. I think as far as trans kids in the United States, I mean, I know there's so many people that are fighting back, and I was encouraged to see this like public, Instagram reel that Zohran Mamdani had like put out specifically about the history of Stonewall and how they were, that New York was going to be a safe haven, and specifically addressing these things. And I think it's going to take more people to really just speak out or just acknowledge. I mean, I think our stories are probably one of the most powerful tools that we have because it really can change people's minds. I think when they realize like what kind of industrial scale gaslighting has been going on and this concerted effort to like just generate so much hatred for our kids and us, and just to create this political issue essentially that allows them to like win more elections. I mean, I think that's really it in a nutshell, and they don't seem to care how many people get hurt. So I just I think the majority is on our side. I mean, honestly, I think it's clear that it is, but unfortunately the way things stand, it's a minority of very extremist kind of viewpoints that are driving all of these things, and it's going to require more resistance and continued resistance. And I'm hoping that when I get settled in Canada to kind of ramp up my participation with the dads and use our feet outside of the US, because we won't be as much hopefully in the target of possibly whoever it is that like really wants to see us go down or hurt us, which I mean that's what it feels like. I'm much relieved to have Charlie in Canada, I can tell you that. Like, I mean, having her here until she left was always a little bit nerve-wracking because I mean, you just you hear rumors and just you think, is something going to happen? Are they going to start sending the Gestapo our way?
Ed, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really amazing conversation. For folks who are interested, we are hoping to release the Dad's feature-length film sometime next year, coming to a film festival near you. But Ed, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.
Thank you, Stephen. Great to see you. And Lizette, it's wonderful to finally meet you. And hopefully we'll get a chance to have more conversations in the future.
I would love that. Continued blessings and luck. It's a lot right now to have to uproot your life. So
love you,
yes,
man.
Well, love you too. Take care.
Now it's time for our recurring segment, Allies and Assholes, where we highlight individuals and groups who are supporting the LGBTQI community on the one hand and call out straight up assholes who are trying to move us all backwards on the other. Lisette, who are we talking about today?
Well, Stephen, our ally of the week is a U.S. representative from the state of California, Robert Garcia. Representative Garcia introduced the International Human Rights Defense Act, which directs the State Department to establish a special envoy to create a global strategy to prevent and respond to the criminalization, discrimination, and violence against LGBTQIA people internationally.
Lisa, when I read about this, I was like, wow, because as LGBTQ plus people in the US and around the world face escalating violence, discrimination, and rollbacks of their rights, Garcia's bill would protect these communities at home and abroad. It's aspirational, but if it passes, this bill will show the world that the US can be a leader when it comes to protecting dignity and human rights once again.
That's right, Stephen, because currently 64 countries criminalize same-sex relationships and 12 countries include jurisdictions that allow the death penalty for private consensual same-sex relations. So this bill would go a long way towards making the world a safer place for LGBTQ plus people. And this is why Representative Robert Garcia is our ally of the week.
Congratulations to Representative Garcia. And now on to our asshole of the week. Lisa, our asshole of the week goes to the CEO of XXXY Athletics, Jennifer Say. Jennifer is a former artistic gymnast who won the 1986 National Gymnastics Championships, who also runs the anti-trans clothing company XXXY Athletics, which famously donates a portion of all its proceeds to organizations fighting against trans inclusion in sports. Recently, old Jenny from the block has been trying to bribe female soccer players to turn against trans players. She's been on social media offering to give $10,000 to the next player in the National Women's Women's Soccer League to stand up in defense of keeping women's soccer female.
Steven, bribing people online. That's how desperate transphobes are, to get people to buy into their bullshit. They've got to pay them, just like those fake MAGA accounts run by people in foreign countries. Nobody is buying your BS anymore.
You said, just like all those fake MAGA accounts. We didn't even talk about that today. How you gonna be a MAGA? You gonna be MAGA down from Indonesia? Like, how you gonna be MAGA for Trump in Nigeria? How you gonna be all MAGA land from Thailand? Like, it was crazy. Just like Jennifer Say, trying to bribe people to be transphobes. Have you ever?
I mean, these people will stop at nothing, Steven.
And this is why Jennifer Say of XXXY Athletics is our asshole of the week. Well, that's our show for today, folks. I want to thank today's guest, Ed Diaz, for joining us. And of course, I got to give it up to my mama in the tan, Lisette Trujillo, for holding me down.
Steven, we're like twinning today, and I love it.
Twin.
It's a reminder that I too couldn't do this without you. And of course, we couldn't do this without our listeners.
And folks, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channels, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, subscribe to our Substacks, and do everything you've got to do to stay up to date with everything going on here at the Parent Advocate Podcast. Goodbye.